Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the WOW History Channel. My name is Ron Guth, and each week I try to bring you an item of historical interest that after you hear the story, hopefully you'll say, wow, I didn't know that, or wow, that's not something I was taught in school. This week's topic is going to be slave hire badges, also known as slave tags and slave badges. These badges were issued by the city of Charleston, South Carolina, between 1800 and 1865, and they were used to regulate the hiring out of slaves. Now, why would Charleston need such a system? Slaves were a very valuable income producing asset, so it was important to keep them busy at all times. If they weren't working, they weren't making money. So, in the off season, like let's say after harvesting was done, sometimes the owners would hire the slaves out to people in the city of Charleston for a variety of occupations. Well, one of the problems with doing that was that the whites complained that the slaves were taking their jobs. So the city came up with a system of tightly regulating the hiring out of slaves so that they could control part of it and also generate tax revenues for the city. If you were a slave owner, you would go to the city and apply for a slave badge, and you would register your particular slave who applied for a particular occupation. Here's a picture of an 1840 slave tag from Charleston, South Carolina. It'll give you a good idea of what these things look like. This is a fairly standard form that was used throughout the time that these were issued. You'll notice at the top there's a small hole, and this was where a string would be attached so that the tag could be worn around the neck of the slave. The city name was stamped into the tag, in this case Charleston, also the occupation, in this case servant, the date, here 1840, and then the individual serial numbers were punched in by hand once the tag was issued. You'll notice that the corners of this are trimmed. Usually these are square or diamond shaped and they have sharp pointy corners, and you can imagine that if these were worn under clothing that they could poke your skin. So a lot of times you'll find them with the corners trimmed or they'll be scalloped, and in rare instances the tags are round. So there's a variety of shapes and sizes as you can see in this photograph. Now this photograph is taken from a Poulin auctions. This was a large collection of over 100 slave tags. In fact, there were 146 in total. So you can see the variety of different shapes that were used. Slave tags are actually quite rare. I first heard about slave tags, or first discovered them, in 1993 when Stax, an auction company in New York, sold the John J. Ford collection. John had purchased the collection of FCC Boyd and then expanded upon the collection, and he had accumulated 14 slave tags over the years. When his slave tags were auctioned in 1993, they brought $60,000 for 14 tags, so you can see that the average price was fairly high. This was quite a revelation to the collecting community because, first of all, we had hardly ever heard of these before, and second, we were shocked at how valuable they were. In 1993, the cataloger noted that there might be as few or as many as 100 slave tags known in total. Now, most slave tags that have been discovered have been excavated, or they've been discovered in the ground by metal detectors. So a lot of them are in very rough shape. They're corroded, they're pitted, they're green with the patina that normally comes from being in the ground for a long time. Once the metal detectorists discovered how valuable these things were, they went out and started looking for them, and they found quite a few. The Poulin collection that I mentioned earlier had 146 examples, and it's the largest collection in private hands. Take, for instance, the Smithsonian Institution has only 3. The American Numismatic Society has only a handful. So to have 146 of these in one collection is really amazing. The other notable thing about the Poulin collection is that there is a complete run from 1800 to 1865, and in some cases, like 1808, it's the only example known from that particular year. Naturally, because of their high value, a lot of these slave tags have been counterfeited. And because of the rough nature of the originals, the fact that they're excavated and corroded and such, it's very easy to duplicate that appearance by sticking the counterfeit slave tag in the ground for a few months in wet soil, and soon they'll look just like the old crusty ones that are, over 150 years old. So it's important, if you want to start collecting these things, make sure you buy them only from a reputable company, a reputable firm that will guarantee their authenticity and will give you a buyback if they turn out to be counterfeit in the future. Slave tags were issued for a variety of occupations, the most common of which is servant. Now, the servant occupation is the most common by about 4 times all the others. The second most common occupation is porter, and then it's followed by more rare occupations such as fruiterer, fisher, mechanics, and carpenter. If you look at the serial numbers of these slave tags, and if you assume that they were issued sequentially, most of the time you'll see serial numbers of 100 or less, sometimes a little bit more. But then we've also found tags such as in the Ford collection, his highest number was 2,097. So that indicates as many as that over 2,000 slaves had been hired out in that particular year. In the South Carolina State Museum, there is a tag with a number 5,081 that was issued in 1821. That seems awfully high, but it's very possible that many slaves were hired out in that year. The slave population in Charleston was listed at 15,034 in 1830, and it actually declined over the next 10 years. So if there were 5,000 slaves hired out in Charleston in 1821, you can imagine that was a high percentage of the slaves in the city. Now, I'm not sure whether the census of slaves in 1830 included those in the surrounding areas. If not, then that number would be substantially higher. License fees for slave tags range from $2 for the more common occupations to as much as $7 for the more skilled occupations such as mechanics and carpenters. Now, how much money did this actually raise for the city? In 1848, the city of Charleston collected over $14,000 from slave tag fees. So at $2 a tag, you can see that a serial number of 5,000 or more is entirely possible. In 1859, the city collected over $26,000 from slave tag fees. For the slaves, the tags were an opportunity to achieve a certain level of freedom, not to be freed, but at least to get off the farm, off the plantation, and into the city where living conditions hopefully were a little bit better, and they were able to move about more freely, and they weren't confined to the farm or plantation. So for the slaves, they didn't get the money, but at least their quality of life improved slightly. Nonetheless, these badges had to be worn. The slaves knew they were there, and they were required to show them anytime anybody came up and questioned who they were and why they were in the city. And especially, again, there was animosity from the whites whose jobs were being taken. So you can imagine that they were harassed or bullied on a regular basis. Other cities in the South had slave tag programs, but as far as I know, none of them issued their own tags, and none of the paper records exist today. So Charleston is a very good example of how the slave tag system worked, and because so many tags have been found now, we have a much more complete picture of how this program worked. Now let's take a look at some actual authentic individual slave tags. I've already shown you this 1840 slave tag from Charleston, and that was for a servant, number 289. This is a view of the back of the tag, and generally there's a maker's mark on there. Sometimes it's C. Prince, sometimes it's Lafarge, but on this one here, it's either not existent or it's been corroded so much that you can't see it. And again, you'll see that the corners of the slave tag have been trimmed. Here's a tag from 1830 for a mechanic. You'll notice a small star on the right side of Charleston. Generally, if you were able to see it on the front there, there would be a small star in the front of the C before the city name. The tag number on this one is 20, so that's an early issue item. And again, mechanic is a fairly scarce occupation, so you're not going to see very high numbers for that particular job. Here's the back of that same tag, and you can see the green, we call it verdigris. That is a patina that develops from the corrosion of copper in the ground. Now here's a very rare one for a fruiterer, and this one was obviously excavated. You can see the city name at the top, the serial number of 28, the name fruiterer. Now there's something after the name, I'm not sure what that says, but this was issued in 1821. Here's the back of the fruiterer slave tag with the name Lafar in a small cartouche near the top. Lafar, conveniently, was a city marshal who administered the slave tag program, and he also conveniently happened to have a metalworking firm that produced the tag. So he was sort of double dipping in this slave tag program. Now here is a really, really rough Porter tag from 1813. This is a serial number 92, and you can see where Charleston is punched in, the date's punched in, Porter's punched in, number is punched in, and then the 92 would be hand engraved. Now all the holes in this tag on the upper left and lower left, that's strictly from corrosion, and you can see from the very rough surface that this spent a lot of time in the ground. And finally, I have an allegedly counterfeit tag for a farrier occupation. This was a slave who would put shoes on horses and generally take care of horses. You can see the city name of Charleston at the top. This one does not have the stars in front of the C or after the N. Number is punched in, farrier is punched in, the date is punched in, and the serial number 14 is hand engraved. This is round. It has a small hole at the top, but this has been judged to be inauthentic. However, if you look at it, it has the same crusty surfaces, corrosion pitting, and verdigris that you see on many of the other tokens. So just because it has surfaces that appear to be original does not mean that it is genuine. And so you have to be very careful of these. I did an internet search this morning to see what was available for sale on eBay, and unfortunately there were no examples, even fake or inauthentic ones. But I did do a search on past sales, and I did find a couple fakes that had been sold. I found one lot of 2 fake slave tags that brought roughly $100. I can only imagine what's going to happen with those. Hopefully they won't be stuck in the ground and deliberately seasoned or corroded and then passed off as the real thing, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's what happens to a lot of these things. So again, if you're going to collect these, be very, very careful. So slave tags are a little better known today. Hopefully this gave you some information about something that you'd never heard before, and it's a very interesting area to research. I'm not sure if anyone has done any tabulation of all the known serial numbers, but that would be interesting to see how many were issued, the highest number ever seen, the lowest number ever seen. Obviously, a number 1 tag would be a very important piece, as well as the highest numbered piece. If you're interested in collecting slave tags, there's a great book by Harry S. Hutchins Jr. He's the gentleman that accumulated the collection of 146 slave tags, including the complete date set from 1800 to 1865. I'll put a link in the description below so that if you're interested in obtaining one, you can purchase it through Amazon. Thank you for viewing today's episode. If you like the channel, please hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit the little bell symbol, the icon. That will send you notifications anytime I put up a new video. Generally, my videos go up every Sunday, either in the morning or early afternoon, so you can look forward to that. And be sure to leave a comment and hit the like button. I'd love to hear from you if there are topics that you'd like to see discussed in the future. My job here is to educate and inform, and if there's something that you would like to learn about, I'm all ears. So thanks again for viewing, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.